Hi, welcome back to Miss Tucker Reads. It's Tuesday, so that means it's another chapter of Talking to Dragons by Patricia Reed. This week is chapter 4, in which they learn the perils of inspecting a wizard's broken staff. I stood where I was, panting and dripping. When I got my breath back, I went over to the tree. There was no sign of the wizard, except for the branches I'd noticed. There were 3 of them, and they weren't branches. They were pieces of a staff. I looked at Shiera. That's 2 wizard's staffs you've broken. They're really going to be after you now. I didn't break it, Shiera said indignantly. You did. I did not, I said. We looked at each other for a minute. If neither of us broke it, Shiera said finally, who did? Me, said a voice. I looked up. A little man was sitting in the branches of the tree. He was about 2 feet tall and dressed entirely in green. His eyes were black and very bright, and his ears were slightly pointed. He had to be an elf. I think you mean I said automatically. I shouldn't wonder if you're right. The elf tilted his head to one side. Does it matter? Can you get down from that tree, Shiera said. You're giving me a crick in my neck. The elf looked from me to Shiera and back to me again. Introduce me to your charming companion. Oh, excuse me, I said. I told the elf our names and thanked him for taking care of the wizard. I was a little curious about that. I'd never met an elf, but they didn't have a reputation for altruism. That means being nice to everyone and doing good things. I wasn't sure I wanted to trust one either. Elves can be very tricky. You're welcome, the elf said. I've never cared much for wizards. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to do anything permanent to them. This one will be back in a day or 2. If there is anything we can do for you in return, I would like to hear what it is, I said. If someone in the enchanted forest does you a favor, you have to offer to do one for them. Well, you don't have to, but if you don't, things seem to go wrong a lot after that. You have to be careful, though. If you promise to do a favor before you hear what it is, you end up in more trouble than you started with. I wasn't going to promise anything without finding out first what I was promising, which is probably a good idea for everyone. Consider the debt cancelled, the elf said politely. I thought he sounded disappointed, and I didn't like the way he was looking at my sword. Suddenly, I was very glad Mother had told me about making promises in the enchanted forest. Thank you, I said. You did a very neat job. He had to. The staff had been sliced cleanly into thirds. Oh, fractions! In a book! Think about that. I began to wonder how he had done it. I hadn't thought elves were powerful enough to break a wizard's staff. I didn't want to offend him by asking him about it, though. You may have the staff if you want it, said the elf, waving at the pieces. What good is a busted wizard's staff? Shiera asked. You can't do anything with it. Nonsense, said the elf. Wizard staffs are just as powerful in pieces as they are whole, and they're fairly easy to put back together. Please, take it with you. I didn't like the way he kept suggesting that, though it sounded reasonable enough. Are you sure you don't want it? I asked finally. What would an elf do with a wizard's staff? If you don't take it, I'll just have to get rid of it somewhere. That sounded reasonable too, but I wasn't going to commit myself. He was too insistent. Thank you for the suggestion, I said. We'll think about it. Do, the elf said, and his black eyes twinkled. Perhaps I'll see you later. Goodbye. Before I could say anything, he had disappeared into the treetops. Elves move very quickly. What was that about? Shiera demanded. I don't know about that elf, I said slowly. I think something funny is going on. He was trying too hard to get us to take the staff. Well, we have to do something with it, said Shiera. Why? I said. We didn't break it, and I don't want to mess with a wizard's staff, even a broken one. Shiera frowned. I made a gesture towards the pieces and realized I was still holding the sword in my hand. I started to put it back in its sheath, then stopped. The sheath was as wet as everything else I was wearing. I couldn't put the sword in that. I mean, not all magic swords are rust-proof, and even if you have one that is, putting your sword away without cleaning it is a bad habit to get into. I checked my pockets, just in case, but even my handkerchief was wet. Shiera, do you have anything? No, you wouldn't. You were in the middle of the stream, too. What? What are you mumbling about? Shiera said. I need something to dry off my sword, I said. Everything I have is soaked, but you're just as wet as I am. My voice trailed off, because right then I looked at her, and she wasn't. Wet, I mean. Her shoes were steaming a little, but her hair and her clothes weren't even damp. Fire witches dry off fast, Shiera said in a smug tone. Then can you give me something to clean my sword, I asked. Everything I have is soaked. What does that have to do with the wizard's staff? Oh, give it here. I'll fix it. She held out her hand a little reluctantly. I could see she didn't really want to take the sword. After what had happened the last time she touched it, I couldn't blame her. That's all right, I'll do it, I said. It's my job. All I need is something dry to wipe it with. Shiera glared at me. All I have is my tunic, and I'm not going to take it off so you can dry your stupid sword. If you won't give it to me, it can rust. My face got very hot. I'm sorry, I didn't think about... Oh, shut up and give me the sword. Shut up isn't very nice. Shiera's not very nice. I held it out. Shiera took it a little gingerly, that means very carefully, but neither of us felt anything unusual. While she wiped it dry on the front of her tunic, I walked over to the stream. I was pretty sure now that the water was safe to drink. I'd swallowed some of it when the wizard's wave hit me, and nothing had happened to me yet. I bent over and took a drink. The water was clean and cold, with just a hint of lime. It tasted awfully good, though I prefer lemon-flavored streams myself. I think I like lemon because Mother and I got most of our drinking water from a lemon-flavored stream just inside the forest. It was much nicer than the well water we used for washing, even though it was more work to haul the buckets that far. Shiera came over just as I finished. She looked at me for a minute, then handed me the sword. Here. I took it, and she sat down and started trying to drink out of her cupped hands. Most of the water ran out, but she kept trying. I stood holding the sword and wondering what I was going to do with it. I mean, walking through the enchanted forest with a sword in your hand is just asking for trouble. On the other hand, I couldn't put it away until the sheath dried out, and that would probably take hours. Shiera finished drinking and sat up. Now, what are we going to do about that wizard's staff? Neither one of us wanted to take it with us. Shiera suggested hiding the pieces before we left, and finally I agreed. We walked back over to the tree. I started to put my sword down, then changed my mind. One of the easiest ways of losing important things in the enchanted forest is to put them down while you do something else. That happens to me. All the time. Then you have to go to all the bother of finding whoever took your things before you can get on with whatever you really want to do. I shifted the sword into my left hand and looked around for the nearest piece of staff. Daystar, come see! Shiera was waving a piece of the staff to attract my attention. You really shouldn't do that, I said, as I walked over. You might set off a spell or something. This used to be a wizard's staff, remember? We ought to at least try to be careful. Yes, but look what it did, Shiera said, pointing. I looked down. There was a brown patch in the moss, just the size and shape of the stick Shiera was holding. I bent over and looked more closely. The moss was so dry and brittle that it turned to powder when I touched it. That doesn't sound good. But this is the enchanted forest, I said to no one in particular. You aren't supposed to be able to do things like this. Well, this wizard's staff did, Shiera said. I bet it'll do it again, too. Before I could stop her, she laid the stick down on the moss. She picked it up almost immediately. The moss underneath was brown and dead. I stared. I don't like this, I said. There aren't very many things you can be sure of in the enchanted forest, but I'd never seen a dead plant there, not even in the outer forest. The whole place felt too alive to put up with that sort of thing. I wonder if all wizard staffs do that. I don't know about other staffs, but we can check the other pieces of this one, Shiera said. She walked toward one of the other sticks. I sighed and started for the last one. This one's the same, Shiera reported after a minute. What about yours? Just a minute, I said. I bent over and picked it up with my right hand. When I woke up, Shiera was dripping water on my face. You can stop now, I said. I'm wet enough already. Shiera shook her head. Are you all right? I mean, you're not enchanted or anything, are you? I thought about it for a moment. I don't think so, but if I am, we'll find out pretty soon. I sat up and realized I'd been lying on the moss at the foot of the tree. What happened? How should I know? 1 minute you were standing there with that sword, and then there was some kind of explosion, and when I turned around you were lying here, and that piece of the wizard's staff was over there, burning. I don't think anyone's going to put that staff back together again. It was the middle piece. Shiera scowled. "But I think you were right about that elf." "Where's my sword?" I asked. All of a sudden, I was sure someone had taken it while Shiera and I weren't paying attention. "In your hand," Shiera said. She sounded a little exasperated. "You wouldn't let go of it." I looked down. My left hand was still clenched around the hilt. When I relaxed my hand, the fingers started to tingle. I'd been holding on so tightly that my hand had fallen asleep. Well, at least I hadn't lost it. I started to shift the sword back to my right hand, then stopped and swallowed hard. The hand was burned black. I couldn't even feel it. I looked away, feeling sick. Shiera was staring too. "Daystar, I didn't notice. I was so worried about waking you up, I didn't even see." She stopped. She tilted her head back until she was looking up at the tree trunk, and her eyes flashed. "I'm going to find someone who can fix this," she said grimly, "and then I'm going to find that stupid elf and make him sorry he ever mentioned the wizard's staff." The way she said it made me very, very glad I wasn't an elf, particularly the elf she'd be looking for. "It doesn't really hurt or anything," I offered. As soon as I said it, my arm started to throb. Not the hand, it was my wrist and arm that hurt. As far as I was concerned, that was more than enough. "That's bad," Shiera said. She looked worried. "I know a little about burns from the times when I—" "Are you sure you can't feel anything?" "Not in my hand," I said, "and I'd really rather not talk about it. It might not help, or it might help me not notice the way my arm feels." "Well, let me look at it then, and I won't have to ask questions," Shiera said. I stuck my right hand out in her direction and stared at my sword for a couple of minutes. I didn't succeed in ignoring the sensations that were coming from my arm, but I tried awfully hard. Finally, Shiera said, "You can put it down now." I looked back in her direction. "It's bad," she said. "I don't know what to do for it either. We have to find help, and pretty soon, too. There has to be someone in this forest who knows something about healing. Can you walk?" "My legs are all right," I said. I started to stand up and discovered I was very dizzy. I made it on the second try, but only by using the sword as a prop. Shiera picked a direction, and we started walking. After about 20 steps, that's not very many, I stopped worrying about which way we were going and concentrated on walking and hanging on to the sword. It was hard. I really had to work at it. I was still dizzy, and I was beginning to feel cold, too, all but my arm, which felt as if it were on fire, and I wondered whether the wizard's staff had done more than just burn my hand. I don't know how far we went before we stopped. By that time, Shiera was holding my good arm, trying to help me walk. She couldn't help as much as she might have, because she had to keep out of the way of the sword. As soon as we quit walking, I sat down. "Daystar, are you sure you couldn't put that sword away yet?" Shiera asked. "It gets in the way a lot." "The sheath is still wet," I said hazily. "Well, can we at least put the sheath in the sun so it'll dry faster?" I looked around, feeling sort of lightheaded as well as dizzy. On top of everything, I was getting thirsty. "We can't do that," I said. "That cat has the only patch of sun around here." "What cat?" "That one." I pointed at the large, dignified, black and white cat that was cleaning its face in the middle of a puddle of sunlight. It didn't even strike me as odd that I hadn't noticed it until I started talking about it. Shiera turned her head. As soon as she looked at it, the cat stopped washing itself. It stared at her for a minute, then stood up. The tip of its tail twitched 3 times, and it turned around and started walking away. After a minute, it stopped and looked back over its shoulder. It was obviously waiting. My cat does that when it wants me to feed it. I wonder what this cat wants. Shiera jumped up. "Come on, Daystar, we're going to follow that cat. I think somebody sent it." "That doesn't make sense," I said. But I wasn't in very good shape to argue. Eventually, Shiera got me back on my feet. The cat was still waiting for us, but as soon as we moved in its direction, it started walking again. I decided Shiera was right and concentrated on walking. I don't know how far we followed the cat. It seemed like a long way, but anything would have seemed like a long way at that point. My arm hurt, and every muscle in my body felt shaky. I never quite dropped the sword, but a couple of times I came very close. After a while, I stopped thinking about it. Finally, Shiera stopped moving. "I was about ready for another rest," I said fuzzily. "Is that cat still around?" "This isn't a rest," Shiera said. "We're here." I looked up. We were standing in front of a neat gray house with a wide porch and a red roof. A wisp of smoke, was coming out of the chimney, and whatever was cooking smelled delicious. Over the door was a black and gold sign in block letters that read, "None of this nonsense, please." I'm going to like whoever lives here, I thought. The door of the house was closed, but the black and white cat jumped up on the porch and scratched at it. A moment later, the door swung partway open, and the cat disappeared inside. And that is the end of chapter 4. Stay tuned next week for chapter 5, in which they meet a witch. Very appropriate for Halloween. All right, well, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week. Have a wonderful day, night, evening, whatever it is where you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye.